The call came at 2:47 in the morning, and Vera Simmons almost didn't answer it. She was still in her scrubs, still had dried antiseptic on her left wrist from where she'd been too tired to scrub it all the way off. She'd worked a 14-hour shift in the ICU at St. Augustine Medical Center. Not a slow one, not the kind where you got to sit for 20 minutes and eat something warm. The kind where you lost a patient at 6 p.m. and then had to keep going, had to smile at the next family in line, had to answer questions calmly like something inside you hadn't just collapsed. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Unknown number, Colorado area code. She almost let it go to voicemail. She didn't. That decision, that small, exhausted, thoughtless decision to pick up, would change everything that happened next. Vera was 31 years old. She'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic before she came home and finished her nursing degree. She had a titanium rod in her left femur from an IED that had gone off 60 meters from her convoy outside Kandahar. She walked with a slight hitch when she was tired. She never talked about the rod unless someone asked. She never talked about Kandahar at all. She drove a gray 2019 Subaru with a disabled veteran placard hanging from the rearview mirror. She kept her medical ID badge clipped to the visor. She had a prescription bottle of cyclobenzaprine in the cup holder because her leg seized up in cold weather. And November in Greeley Falls, Colorado was nothing but cold. She was driving home on Route 9 when she answered the phone. The voice on the other end was male, clipped, professional. He said he was a detective with the Greeley Falls Police Department. He said he was investigating a series of pharmacy thefts in the area. He said her name had come up in connection with the controlled substance discrepancy at St. Augustine. She pulled over, not because she had to, because she was a rule follower, because she'd been raised to cooperate with law enforcement, because she had nothing to hide. That was the first mistake she didn't know she was making. The cruiser showed up 3 minutes after she pulled into the lot of a closed gas station on Route 9. She hadn't called anyone. The detective on the phone had said to stay put, that an officer would come to take her statement. She'd assumed it would be quick. A misunderstanding. She had documentation for everything, her prescriptions, her medical credentials, her discharge papers. She was the kind of person who kept documentation for everything. The officer who climbed out of the cruiser was named Taggart. She would learn that later. At the time, he was just a silhouette against his own headlights, one hand on his belt, walking slow and deliberate like he had all the time in the world. He didn't introduce himself. He asked if she'd been drinking. She said no. He asked again. She said no again, and this time she kept her voice very careful and very flat, the way she'd learned to do in the army when someone with rank over her was wrong about something, and she had to find a way to say so without getting written up. He asked her to step out of the vehicle. She told him about the leg. She said it slowly and clearly. Titanium rod, left femur, service connected. She had documentation. It would take her a moment to get out of the car, and she might need to lean against it when she did. He told her to step out of the vehicle. She did. She leaned against the door. Her leg ached in the way it always ached in the cold, a deep specific throbbing that started behind the knee and moved upward like a current. She kept her hands visible. She'd learned that, too. Taggart looked at the placard, then at her badge, then at the prescription bottle she'd told him about when he asked what was in the cup holder. He said the bottle was open. She said yes. She had taken one that morning, with water, at her kitchen table. The bottle was open because it was in use. He said the bottle looked like it had been accessed recently. She said she understood what he was implying and that he was wrong. He told her to put her hands on the hood of the car. There's a specific kind of fear that people who've never worn a uniform don't always understand. It's not the fear of being hurt, exactly. It's the fear of what happens when the people who are supposed to protect you decide that you're the problem. Vera had felt it once before. In a small forward operating base in Helmand Province, when a commanding officer had made a decision that was going to get people killed, and there was nothing she could do but watch it happen and wait. She felt it now, standing in a closed gas station parking lot at 3 a.m. in her scrubs, with her palms flat on the hood of her car and her left leg throbbing, and a man in a uniform who had decided, before he'd asked a single real question, exactly who she was. She asked if she was being detained. Taggart said he was asking the questions. She asked for his name and badge number. He didn't answer. She had a phone in her jacket pocket. She thought about it. She thought about the angle of his body, the way his hand kept drifting back toward his belt, the way he'd stopped looking at her, and started talking into his radio using short words she couldn't quite hear. She did not reach for the phone. She asked again quietly if she was being detained or if she was free to go. He said she was not free to go. She said okay. She kept her hands on the hood. She said okay. A second cruiser arrived 22 minutes later. Vera counted. She had nothing else to do. The officer who stepped out of the second cruiser was a woman named Adkins. Sergeant's stripes. She walked differently than Taggart, not slow, not deliberate, just direct. She looked at Taggart first, then at Vera, then at the car. Then she looked at the badge on the visor and the placard on the mirror and the way Vera was standing. Weight shifted right, left knee slightly bent, hands still flat on the hood, though no one had told her to keep them there. Adkins asked Taggart what he had. Taggart's explained. Vera listened to the way he explained it. The pharmacy discrepancy had become a pharmacy theft. Her pulling over voluntarily had become her being stopped on Route 9 under suspicion. The prescription bottle in the cup holder had become open and accessible in a concerning manner. Adkins was quiet for a moment. She asked Taggart if he'd run the placard. He said he hadn't gotten to that yet. Adkins walked to the passenger side window and looked at the badge. She looked at it for a long time. Then she turned to Vera and asked her to explain, in her own words, what she did for work. Vera told her. ICU, St. Augustine, 14 years. Wait, 14 years. No, 14 hours that shift. She was tired. She'd meant 14 hours. She'd been a nurse for 6 years. She told her about the call from the detective, about pulling over, about cooperating. Adkins asked if she had the detective's name. Vera had the number. She'd kept it open in her recent calls. Adkins took the number. She stepped away and made a call. She was gone for 4 minutes. When she came back, her face had changed, not dramatically, not the way faces change in movies, just a small tightening around the eyes, the particular expression of someone recalibrating. She asked Vera if she was in pain. Vera said her leg hurt. Adkins said she could sit in her car if she wanted. Vera sat in her car. The cold had worked its way through her scrubs and her legs were shaking, though she hadn't noticed until she sat down. She pressed her palms flat against her thighs and breathed. What Adkins had learned in those 4 minutes, there was no detective, not by that name, not assigned to any pharmacy theft investigation in Greeley Falls. The number Vera had answered, the unknown Colorado area code, traced back to a prepaid phone purchased at a gas station in Aurora 3 weeks earlier. What that meant would take another 2 hours to become clear. But here is what it meant. Someone had called Vera Simmons at 2:47 in the morning, impersonating a police detective, and told her to pull over on a dark highway, alone, and someone had made sure there was an officer nearby who would respond. Vera didn't know any of that yet. She sat in her car with the heat finally running, watching Adkins talk to Taggart in the blue-white light of both their cruisers. She could read the body language. Adkins was doing most of the talking. Taggart had his arms crossed, then uncrossed them, then crossed them again. She called her sister from the parking lot, not because she needed rescuing, because her hands were still shaking and she needed to hear a voice she trusted. Her sister's name was Paulette. She picked up on the second ring, already awake. She had a newborn. She was always already awake. Vera told her where she was and what had happened, the short version. Paulette didn't say much. She asked if Vera was safe. Vera said she thought so. Paulette said she was coming anyway. Vera told her she didn't have to. Paulette said she was already getting her keys. Adkins came back to the window 15 minutes later. She asked Vera if the name Gideon Rourke meant anything to her. It did. Gideon Rourke was a pharmacist. He'd worked at the St. Augustine Satellite Pharmacy until 8 months ago, when a controlled substance audit had flagged discrepancies in the dispensing records. Discrepancies that, after investigation, had been traced back to him. He'd been terminated. The case had been referred to the State Pharmacy Board and the District Attorney's Office. Vera had been one of 3 nurses who'd reported the initial discrepancy. She had not led the investigation. She had not testified. She had simply done what she was supposed to do when she noticed something wrong. She had filed an incident report and told the truth when asked about it. Rourke had apparently not forgotten. She told Adkins all of this. She told her about the incident report, about the audit, about the termination. She told her she had copies of everything. She kept copies of everything. Adkins wrote it all down. The thing that happened next, The thing Vera would describe later to the investigators, to the DA's office, to the woman from the Greeley Falls Gazette who called twice before Vera finally agreed to a quote, was not dramatic. It didn't feel like vindication in the moment. It felt like paperwork. Taggart was placed on administrative leave pending a review of the stop. The review would eventually determine that Taggart and Rourke had a connection, a mutual contact, a group chat that investigators would spend 2 months going through. The exact nature of the arrangement was disputed. What wasn't disputed was that Taggart had received a text message from a number associated with Rourke 40 minutes before responding to the call on Route 9, that he had known, or should have known, that the stop had been manufactured, that he had proceeded anyway. He resigned before the review concluded. He did not receive a settlement. He did not keep his pension. That fight took another 8 months in a union arbitration that ultimately ruled against him. He applied for a security guard position at a distribution center in Denver. He was not hired. Rourke was charged with impersonating a law enforcement officer, criminal harassment, and conspiracy. He pled guilty to the first 2 counts. He was sentenced to 18 months, suspended with 5 years of probation and a permanent revocation of his pharmacy license. He would never dispense medication again. Vera was there for the sentencing. She sat in the second row with Paulette beside her. She didn't say anything when the sentence was read. She didn't need to. But here is the part that the Gazette article didn't fully capture. The part that Vera thought about later, driving home through Greeley Falls in the particular quiet of a December morning when the whole town looked like it was holding its breath. Adkins had not been assigned to Route 9 that night. She'd been on a different patrol circuit on the far side of town. She'd heard the call come through and recognized something in the way Taggart had requested backup, a specific phrasing, a tone, something that didn't quite track for a routine traffic stop. She'd come anyway, off her assigned route, without being asked. She'd been a sergeant for 2 years. She'd come up through the same department Taggart had. She knew him, not well, but enough to know that something in his voice on the radio had sounded wrong. She had followed a feeling. Vera thought about that a lot. She thought about all the nights when someone didn't follow a feeling, when no one came off their assigned route, when the second cruiser never arrived. She knew those nights happened. She'd heard enough stories from other nurses, other veterans, other women who'd been pulled over alone on dark roads and had no one who materialized out of the cold to ask the right questions. She was lucky. She knew she was lucky. She hated that luck had anything to do with it. 6 months after the sentencing, Vera was asked to speak at a public safety forum hosted by the Greeley Falls City Council. The topic was oversight of traffic stops involving medical personnel and veterans. She almost didn't go. She'd told the story enough times by then that it felt worn thin, like a word you say too many times until it stops sounding like itself. She went. She stood at the front of a conference room in the Civic Center with a glass of water she never touched and told the room what had happened. Not the legal version, the actual version. The 14-hour shift, the cold, the shaking hands, the way she hadn't reached for her phone because she was afraid of what would happen if she did. The way she'd kept her hands on the hood even after she didn't have to anymore, because her body hadn't gotten the message yet. She talked about Adkins. She said her name clearly, into the microphone, so it was on the record. A woman in the third row was crying. Vera didn't stop. She'd learned a long time ago that when someone else's tears appeared in the room, it didn't mean you were done. It meant you were telling the truth. The City Council passed new protocol guidelines for traffic stops involving credentialed medical personnel and disabled veteran placard holders 3 months later. They weren't perfect. They were a start. Adkins was promoted to lieutenant the following spring. Vera was working the day that news came through. Another long shift, another Tuesday, another waiting room full of people who needed something she could give them. She read the notification on her phone during a 10-minute break, standing in the hallway outside the ICU with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. She felt something move through her that she didn't have a name for. Not happiness exactly, not relief. Something older than either of those things. She finished her coffee. She went back in.